Welcome to the DX Today podcast, your weekly deep dive into the AI ecosystem. I'm Rick Spair, and joining me as always is Laura.
Thanks, Rick. And I have to tell you, this is one of those stories I have been waiting all year to properly dig into. Because it sits right at the messy intersection of generative AI, real money, and copyright law, which is where the genuinely interesting fights always happen.
So set it up for us, because on Thursday, August 6th, the AI music company Suno published a blog post that on the surface reads like a fairly ordinary, almost boring corporate policy update about downloads and community guidelines.
On the surface, absolutely, but underneath it is a company quietly admitting that the fire hose it built has a serious plumbing problem, and that the plumbing problem has now escalated into a federal criminal matter with a guilty plea attached to it.
That is a striking way to frame it. So walk our listeners through what Suno actually announced in that post, because I think the specifics here matter enormously, and I suspect most people skimmed the headline and moved on.
The post was titled, "How We're Building the Future of Music Responsibly," and Chief Executive Mikey Schulman laid out 4 guiding principles alongside 3 genuinely concrete product changes that will reshape how the platform works for every single person using it.
Give me the 4 principles first, because I have always found that a company's stated principles tell you precisely what that company believes it is being accused of, which is often more revealing than the accusation itself.
Principle 1, great music is made by people. Principle 2, technology opens new possibilities for creatives. Principle 3, AI should enable originality, not imitation. And Principle 4, more people creating music should strengthen the whole ecosystem rather than dilute it.
Every single one of those reads like a direct rebuttal to a specific paragraph in a lawsuit, which tells you exactly where the legal pressure has been coming from across the last 2 years of this company's existence.
Exactly right. And the third principle in particular, originality rather than imitation, is doing an enormous amount of quiet work in that sentence. Because imitation is precisely what the major record labels alleged in their infringement complaints against the company.
All right, so principles aside, what are the actual product changes here? Because principles are cheap to publish, and product changes are the thing that genuinely alters user behavior at scale, especially on a platform this size.
3 things. First, audio watermarking and fingerprinting, so a Suno track can be identified after it leaves the platform. Second, a substantially tightened download policy. And third, updated community guidelines with tiered enforcement behind them.
Let's take the watermarking first, because provenance for generated media is one of the hardest unsolved problems in this entire field. And I'm very curious how much technical detail they were actually willing to commit to in writing.
Almost none, which is the part I keep circling back to. The rollout is described only as happening in the coming weeks, with no firm date and, critically, with no named industry standard attached to the implementation at all.
That absence of a named standard is not a small detail to gloss over, because a watermark that only Suno itself can read is a fundamentally different product from a watermark that the entire industry can independently read and verify.
That is the crux of it. If Spotify, Apple Music, and YouTube cannot independently verify the mark themselves, then the watermark functions as a compliance gesture rather than as real industry infrastructure that platforms can actually enforce against.
Now, the download policy is where I suspect the real teeth are hiding. So explain exactly what changes for a free user versus a paying subscriber on the platform starting from this announcement.
Free tier songs become playable and shareable only, meaning you simply cannot download the audio file anymore. Full stop. Paid subscribers receive a monthly download allowance with the option to purchase additional downloads once they exceed that cap.
So let's get into that abuse case, because I understand there is an actual criminal prosecution sitting underneath all of this policy language, and the numbers involved are genuinely staggering once you look at them closely.
There is, and it is the first case of its kind anywhere in the United States. A 54-year-old North Carolina man named Michael Smith pleaded guilty to a single count of conspiracy to commit wire fraud, which carries a statutory maximum of 5 years in prison.
take us through the mechanics of it? Because I think a lot of people hear the phrase streaming fraud and picture something much smaller and far less industrial than what this operation actually turned out to be in practice.
Smith bought hundreds of thousands of AI-generated songs from an accomplice, uploaded them across Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube Music, and then built an army of roughly 10,000 bot accounts to stream those tracks continuously.
10,000 bot accounts is an extraordinary number, and presumably the streaming platforms all operate fraud detection systems specifically designed to catch exactly that kind of coordinated, inauthentic, machine-driven listening behavior at scale.
They absolutely do, and this is where it gets clever in a genuinely uncomfortable way. He routed all of those bots through VPNs, so the traffic appeared to originate from many scattered locations rather than one single source.
So the deception was layered on both sides at once, with synthetic supply on one end and synthetic demand on the other end, and the streaming platform sitting in the middle, paying out entirely real money.
That is exactly the shape of it, and I think that framing is the clearest way to understand it. At the peak of the operation, he was generating approximately 661,440 streams every single day.
660,000 streams a day from one single operation. What does a volume like that actually translate into in terms of real royalty payments landing in somebody's bank account at the end of the month?
Annual royalties exceeding $1.2 million at the height of it, and here's the detail that really lands. The scheme ran for roughly 7 years, from 2017 all the way through 2024.
7 years is the number that genuinely stops me in my tracks, because that is not a clever exploit that got discovered and patched quickly. That is a structural gap that persisted across an entire industry for the better part of a decade.
And the totals reflect exactly that duration. Prosecutors say the scheme brought in more than $10 million in royalty payments overall, and Smith agreed to forfeit just over $8 million as part of the plea agreement he signed.
Now, here's the question I keep coming back to throughout this whole story. Whose money was that, really? Because streaming royalty pools are not infinite, and every fraudulent stream has to be paid for out of somewhere.
That is the part the music industry cares about far more than the criminal sentence. On the major platforms, royalties are paid out of a shared pool, so a fake stream mathematically dilutes the payout owed to a real working artist.
So this is emphatically not a victimless crime against faceless corporations. This is a quiet transfer of money away from an extremely long tail of working musicians who will never even know that it happened to them.
Precisely. And that reframing is exactly why the labels move so aggressively on this, and why a download cap on a generative music platform suddenly looks far less like routine product management and far more like fraud prevention infrastructure.
Let's connect those two dots explicitly for people, because I want listeners to genuinely understand why limiting downloads specifically is the lever that matters here, rather than limiting generations, which would seem like the more obvious move.
Because the fraud requires actual files to exist. You cannot upload a song to a distributor unless you can first download the audio file, so capping downloads directly throttles the total volume any single bad actor can push into the ecosystem.
That is genuinely elegant in a way, and it also explains why they did not simply cap generation itself, since generation is the enjoyable part that keeps 2 million subscribers paying their money every single month.
Right? They protected the engagement loop and constrained the distribution loop, which is a genuinely thoughtful piece of policy design, even if the underlying motivation was largely defensive and driven almost entirely by ongoing litigation pressure.
Now, there is a third piece to this announcement that I think has gotten considerably less attention than it deserves, which is the copyright detection partnership they quietly announced alongside everything else in that post.
Suno is integrating a system called Sentinel from the lyrics company Music's Match, which is designed specifically to detect copyrighted material, and that addresses a genuinely different failure mode than the streaming fraud we have been discussing.
And that brings us squarely to the litigation, because Suno has been fighting copyright suits from the major labels since 2024, and at least one of those very significant cases has now fully resolved itself.
Warner Music Group settled. They sued back in June of 2024, alleging mass infringement from training on copyrighted recordings. And that case has now converted into an ongoing commercial partnership between the two companies instead.
Tell me about the structure of that deal, because a lawsuit converting directly into a licensing arrangement is becoming a genuinely recognizable pattern across this entire generative AI sector at the moment, not just in music.
Under the deal, Suno will ship brand new license models that replace its current versions, and Warner artists can opt in to let fans generate content using their voices, their compositions, and their likenesses.
Opt-in is absolutely the operative phrase in that sentence, and I want to underline it heavily because the entire fight across the last 2 years has been about consent that was never asked for in the first place.
And there was an asset transfer bundled in as well, which I found genuinely surprising when I read it. As part of the arrangement, Suno acquired the concert discovery platform Songkick from Warner Music Group outright. And the financial terms of both the settlement and the partnership were not disclosed by either company.
That is a strange and very interesting detail because Songkick is live event infrastructure, which strongly suggests Suno wants to sit inside the real music economy rather than permanently adjacent to it. So give me the scale of the company sitting underneath all of this.
Suno raised $400 million in a Series D round on June 3rd of this year at a $5.4 billion valuation, led by Bond Capital alongside a long list of participating investors.
And on the usage side of the equation, how many people are we actually talking about here? Because a $5.4 billion valuation implies a very large and very deeply engaged user base underneath it.
More than 100 million people have used Suno to create music since it launched publicly in 2023. And over 2 million of those people have converted into actual paying monthly subscribers.
So this is emphatically not a fringe experiment on the edge of the industry. This is a consumer platform at genuine scale writing rules that will shape what an enormous number of people can do with generated audio.
And that is precisely why I think the missing standard on the watermark matters so much here. At this kind of scale, provenance decisions made by one single company effectively become the default infrastructure for an entire creative sector.
So what is your honest assessment then? Is this meaningful structural reform? Or is this a company doing the bare minimum necessary to keep its remaining lawsuits from getting materially worse over the next 12 months?
I think it is genuinely both, and I do not say that simply to hedge my position. The download cap has real teeth and a real revenue cost, while the watermark remains a promise with no verifiable delivery date attached to it.
That seems like exactly the right read to me, and it also hands our listeners a very clean and very practical test to apply over the coming months as all of this actually rolls out in practice.
The test is genuinely simple. Watch closely whether that watermark becomes something the streaming platforms themselves can independently read and act upon, or whether it quietly stays a private signal that only Suno itself is able to verify.
And watch equally closely whether the remaining label lawsuits follow the Warner path into licensing arrangements, because that would tell us the industry has collectively decided that settlement decisively beats litigation in this particular domain.
That is the structural question sitting underneath every part of this. And honestly, the answer will shape how every generative media company on Earth approaches training data and rights clearance for the next several years running.
Laura, this has been a genuinely fascinating one, and I think the real through line here is that generative media has finally collided with the boring infrastructure of payments, rights, and enforcement. That's all for today's episode of the DX Today podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.